In May of 2015, my family and I all went to Zimbabwe to visit Allan Savory. We had been accepted to attend training in Zimbabwe, there at the African Center of Holistic Management, so we could study holistic management and then take it back to our farm in Idaho and teach it in Idaho, parts of Montana and parts of Washington and also parts of Oregon, which we did, and we became certified instructors. My wife and I did, and my son David became one of the youngest grassland management practitioners in the area. So that all worked really good. The bad part about that, of course, was the fact that it kind of came to a screeching halt when the family all got sick from black mold, which had been a problem with the house before we headed to Africa. And then when we came back, had never been fixed, and the kids got really sick, and so did my wife, and they had to go find medical attention, and spent actually 40 months trying to get well from the black mold that was a result from 5 different water intrusions into a house that was only 7 years old. So it got to be real ugly, and ultimately we couldn't go back to the farm. We lost the farm, and now we're here in Colorado. But I still believe in holistic management. I still think that it is a good way to treat the land. I still am fully in support of regenerative farming and how you can manage regenerative farming through holistic management, both ecologically, economically, and socially. And I think the 3 legs of that stool are very important. And here is a speech given by Allan Savory that I captured and I'm going to present, because I just think that it's wise that people understand what holistic management is all about, and that it gets captured for the future so we can refer back to it. So here's Allan Savory.
My purpose tonight is to convey to you that although a lot of things are going wrong in the world today, there's a simple reason for it. Many years ago, my wife and I attended a big conference in Sweden, and it was addressed by Gro Harlem Brundtland, then Prime Minister of Norway, and she was a special envoy to UN and so on, and is one of the elders, those wise people they had around the world, a group of them. And she was talking to us and talking about the millions of dollars spent on a problem, and the millions of dollars spent on another problem, and billions spent on another one, and explaining all these problems we were trying to deal with on a global scale, and how despite the expenditure of really billions of dollars, things were getting worse. And she was appealing to us as scientists to try to see the interconnections between them. And everybody was nodding their heads and saying that made sense. After that, I went and put the problems on little cards and really played with them on a carpet, just thinking, all right, rearrange them, what are the connections? And I found they're not interconnecting. They're all coming from one source. It's a systemic problem. And if you think about it, that probably makes sense to you. We've been seeing civilizations fail because of agriculture. We've been seeing the problems get bigger and bigger. But how can so much go wrong when most people are trying to do their best? Most people are good. We've got tremendous knowledge over the centuries developing that made agriculture and civilization possible. When so much is going wrong, it's got to suggest to you that maybe there's a simple systemic cause. And that I want to talk to you about tonight, and how much you can do. Every one of you personally can do that about that. Now, before I begin, what is this? What is that? Do you want to come and smell it? It's cow shit. Okay, I'm making a point here. What that represents is more important to your future, the future of the United States, the future of all of your families, the whole world, the survival of civilization. What that represents is more important than all the technology in the world and all the money in the world. They're not going to save us. What that represents might save us. What do you want to smell it?
Pull the mic down.
Sorry?
Pull that mic down, push it down.
Like that. Okay. I'll leave it there so that you can all see what it represents. Now, let me begin with agriculture, because it's central to everything. What is agriculture? If we look mainstream, particularly in our cities and so on, what do people think agriculture is? They all think of it as crop production. No, agriculture is not crop production alone. Agriculture is the production of food and fiber from the world's land and waters. So when we look at fisheries, forestry, wildlife, crop production, livestock, these are all agriculture. Now, how important is it? I was speaking in London to a group of parliamentarians, an all-party group in the House of Lords, a while back, and the meeting was begun by a very senior, one of the lords there, and he began the meeting by saying that agriculture wasn't very sexy in Britain. Not very sexy. When we talk about the importance of agriculture, we're often told it's not very important in many countries because it only represents X or Y% of gross domestic product. Well, when we think about the importance of agriculture, without it, we can't have an orchestra, we can't have a university, we can't have a government, we can't have a church, we can't have anything without agriculture. Everything we do is based on agriculture. There is nothing in the world more important than agriculture. It's not just a percentage of gross domestic product. Now, how are we doing with agriculture? How is it performing? We need about 0.5 ton of food for a human being for a year to have a healthy human being. If you look at the published figures, and I believe they're very, very conservative because they're mostly from the croplands, we're producing over 75 billion tons of dead, eroding soil per year. That's more than 10 tons of soil for every human alive today. And our population is expected to reach 9 or 10 billion people. So we're producing about 20 times as much dead, eroding soil as food we need per human. That's not too good. What else is agriculture leading to? You know the ocean life is dying. We're getting enormous problems there. When we look on the land, our agricultural practices are leading to increasing droughts and floods, even without change in the weather, increasing poverty, social breakdown, violence, pastoral genocide. When you start creating pastoral genocide of ancient, proud warrior people, you provide ideal recruiting grounds for dissident organizations, Al-Qaeda's, etc. It's producing masses of boatloads of people drowning. You might be hearing about it, trying to cross the Mediterranean to get to Europe, crowding our cities, massive emigration of people to cities and slums around some of the cities. Beijing, China's biggest city, in some days, in one day, is getting up to 250,000 tons of sand dumped on the city in one day. Nature will win. All right, so it's leading to all of these problems, including climate change. All right, so we're not performing too well. So let's look into this, because this is not a doomsday talk. Your common sense will tell you that agriculture needs to be based on biological sciences, ecological principles, etc. When we look at the situation, as far as there aren't exact figures for this, but in all the countries we're working, talking to people, seeing what's going on, it appears to me that we've got about 3 or 5% of agriculture that's based on biological science. These are the people struggling to keep organic, sustainable, various forms of agriculture based on science, biological science, alive. And the bulk of agriculture worldwide, remember this is a production of food and fiber from the world's land and waters, is based on chemistry and really smart marketing of technology, finding new marketable uses of technology. That's not wise when agriculture is causing the amount of damage and climate change that it's doing. All right, this isn't a new problem. One of the people who studied it is Rebecca Costa, and she wrote the book The Watchman's Rattle. Now, what she concluded was the many civilizations that failed before us, because their agriculture failed, didn't fail just because of their agriculture failing. They failed, she says, and I believe she's right, because their societies could not address the complexity of rising population and deteriorating environment. So what they did was they turned away from knowledge or science, as it was in those days, increasingly to religion, faith, sacrifices, human sacrifices, things of that nature, and they shelved the problems for future generations. Well, we know what happened. Their entire civilizations collapsed. But isn't that what we're doing globally today? Shelving these problems for future generations and turning increasingly away from science? I see a lot of that pattern in what we're doing today. Right, looking at that situation she was trying to describe, what do you see in this list of things? What do these have in common? Do you notice that everything on the left is something we make? Do you notice that everything on the left uses technology, some artifact of the human mind? Do you notice that everything on the left needs expertise? I have no idea how to make a watch or anything simple like that even. I don't have the expertise. And everything on the left, if we think about it, is getting more and more successful. And we're advancing incredible pace. It's an accelerating pace with the things we make. What about the things on the right? What do you see there? Do you notice that there's nothing there we make? Everything on the right we manage. Do you notice that on the left is not where we're getting into increasing troubles? On the right is, if we're honest with ourselves, we're getting into increasing trouble. Troubles are hitting us like one tsunami after another, globally. So what's the difference between these two lists? And the answer is that everything on the left is what is by definition complicated. Okay, the things we make do what they're designed to do. They don't have unexpected properties. And if something is missing or a part breaks or a battery is flat or whatever, they don't work. Now, when we look at everything on the right, we find they are complex. Not complicated, they're complex. That means everything there, including human organizations that we are managing, all right, are self-renewing. If a part is missing, they don't stop functioning. They continue to function, but in changed form. If we fish out a species of fish in the sea, or we kill out a species of plant on our land, or whatever, everything goes on, but in a changed form. It's self-organizing. And when we look at the things on the right, not only that, but particularly with our organizations, all right, they do what they're designed to do, but they have unexpected properties as well. Now, these are the differences. So what's happening clearly globally and has been happening for centuries is that the things we manage are where we're running into trouble, and the key to it is that word complexity. Another person who studied this, and we need to learn from these people, is John Ralston Saul. And he's written a number of things, but one of his best known is that best-selling book, Voltaire's Bastards. I don't know how many of you have read it, but I'd advise you to all read it. It's an incredible book. And what he did there was to look at the age of enlightenment or reason in Voltaire's time. Up until that time in the world, there'd been some incredible blunders occurring. And the best minds said these blunders are occurring because of amateurism, because people can inherit or buy their positions in the army, the company, whatever, the organization. So we were going to have no more of that. And from then on, we were going to go into a much different age where there'd be no major blunders like that, because all our organizations would be headed by professionally trained people. So you'll find that today. Our organizations are led by highly trained professional people. And Napoleon spread that around Europe more than any other leader. So what Saul did was to say, well, what happened? Did the blunders decrease or increase? Let's look at what happened. And he looks right across all the sciences, different fields. He gives you case study after case study. What he found was the blunders increased. So we got more frequent and bigger blunders worldwide when we put management under expert leadership. What Saul concluded was that the problem was due to really our educational system. And this is a quote from him. I think you can all read that for yourselves. So he felt that the problem was that we are educating and training in these silos of knowledge. And that was what was causing it. And he went further to explain that even our language changes, not to communicate better, but to protect ourselves in our professions. And this is what he concluded, was that it's easier to learn a foreign language than to learn the jargon of a profession, which you can only learn by becoming one. All right, now, if that's the cause of our problems, we have enormous difficulties ahead of us to address that. Rebecca Costa believed that we would only only achieve an ability to deal with complexity by using technology to build the frontal part of our brains rapidly to deal with complexity. In other words, using technology. Actually, I think it's much simpler. It's a systemic problem. But that's useful background for you to have. Now, one of the difficulties with complexity is that when we get problems in any complex system, that means a human organization, institution, or in nature, they are what they call wicked in the jargon of system science. Now, that doesn't mean they're amoral. It just means they're extremely difficult to solve, almost impossible. Now, there are three wicked problems with our organizations, and we're going to have to face these if we want any sort of future for agriculture and thus civilization. One is that our institutions, no matter how good, it could be us in this room in them, we cannot, in institutions, accept new knowledge outside the prevailing beliefs of our society. And it can take years to do that. Eric Ashby studied that, wrote about it. It can take 100 to 200 years, and it just cannot change. The Royal Navy took 200 years to accept that lime juice would stop scurvy after it was first demonstrated. It was 50 years after it was second time it was demonstrated, and it took the Merchant Navy of Britain another 70 years. And that's not because they're British and they're stupid and it was long ago. That's how we are today. All right, so that's one of the difficulties we have to deal with. I'll talk a little later about overgrazing having nothing to do with animal numbers. We've known that scientifically for over 60 years. Institutionally, can you name any institutions in the world that have accepted it yet? I can't. All right, so that's a difficulty we're going to have to face. The other is when we get into our institutions, because of the complexity, again, this is how we function, is that we begin to defend the organization more than pursue the mission. And the classic case of that right now is the Catholic Church. They must have known, it's impossible to believe that they didn't know about pedophile priests 100, 200 years ago. But they protected the priests to protect the church. And only when it was sufficiently known in the public did they do something about it. This is why you get whistleblowers and things like that, is people just have to get out of the organization to try to alert the public because information gets smothered in our organizations. And I'm not talking about somebody else. It's me, it's you, it's all of us. This is how we are as humans when we get in our organizations. And the other one is that no matter how perfect we are, no matter how well-meaning and ethical and everything we are, no matter how intelligent we are, in our organizations, very commonly you'll see two characteristics in the outcomes: lacks humanity and lacks common sense. An example of that would be, does it make sense for America to produce oil, to grow corn, to feed cattle, and produce fuel? Does that make sense to any of you? Doesn't to me, it doesn't to most people. They just say that's inhumane, that lacks common sense. But we do it. And thousands of people sign off on it, almost nobody protests it. So we've got three wicked problems that we're going to have to face somehow. And again, this is not a doomsday talk. I think about what I'm going to talk to you about is beginning to show us a way forward with these things. All right, so what are we facing today? We're facing many issues, but you can bring them all together finally in this: global biodiversity loss, desertification, climate change. These are actually one thing. Without biodiversity loss, desertification, that's land turning to desert, doesn't occur. Desertification isn't a problem. It's a symptom of biodiversity loss. And unless you deal with desertification, you're never going to be able to deal with climate change. These are one issue. But today, you couldn't even get a conference anywhere in the world to discuss these as one issue. They're completely divided in our siloed organizations, structures. All right, so I'm going to look at the desertification one to see what it gives us in clues, because historically, this is more or less where it went. I didn't know where we were going. I was just trying to save wildlife and stop the land degradation. So let's look at the desertification. It's not occurring everywhere. In climates like this, tropical forests and so on, where you don't even have to wear a jersey any time of the year, the temperature difference doesn't vary much, winter and summer, it's humid nearly all the time. It doesn't matter how much you damage the land, if you rest it, it recovers. And the civilizations that failed there, we find their ruins under the recovered vegetation. Where the problem is occurring is where it's very seasonal, where we get a growing period, a rainy period, whatever it is, and then we get a very long period where it's dormant, not growing, dry, whatever. That's where the problem's occurring. Now, what are the proportions of these around the world? Fortunately, from space we can see it, and very roughly I've outlined in red for you the areas where desertification is the big issue. And I think you can see there that that's about 2/3 of the world's land. So that's pretty crucial to all of us. Even if you live in the dark green zone and you are completely secure and it's never going to desertify, we can't be an island unto ourselves. We're all in this boat together now, globally. So let's look at this desertification a little bit further. And what really is it? As I say, it begins with biodiversity loss, litter, soil cover, things like that, as some of you are very aware of. And this leads to the available precipitation being less effective. So let me explain that. This is a picture I took in the Tehama Desert in 1981 when I was doing a brief job for World Bank. And we were close to a research station, and 25 millimeters of rain fell, about an inch of rain. That's actually 3 drums of rain, roughly. So that's giving us 1,250 200-liter drums, or 45-gallon drums, of water per hectare. Now, that's a hell of a lot of water. Well, the next day, that's what the land looked like. And the broken ground in the foreground is where I had to use the key of the car to break the surface. It was so hard. Where had all that water gone? That is desertification. And where that water had gone, of course, is that when we look at an exposed soil like that, in the first picture you could see the water running off the land, and we've always been very aware of that long ago. What we weren't aware of as much is what was happening to the water that soaked into the land. So some of it soaked into the land, but over the next day or two, that's leaving the surface of the soil and evaporating back to the air. So all that rain that fell, very little was effective. Very little remained in the soil because it ran off the surface or evaporated out of the soil. Now, if the soil had been covered, what would have happened is the bulk of that water would not have run off the surface. It will run off in very high snow melts or very high rainfalls, but the bulk of it will soak in and flow through the soil to keep rivers flowing, aquifers, wetlands, etc. And then over the following days, water will leave through the plants. So effective precipitation is that precipitation that remains in the soil and only leaves it through plants or through the soil. And non-effective is that precipitation that leaves across the soil or out of the soil. Now, that I never found in any textbook in the world, and I had to just piece the bits together and try to put that simple story together. But it's catching on. More and more people are beginning to understand that today. Now, is this only happening in the arid and semi-arid areas, as we used to be told? Well, the answer is no. Here's a rainfall, high rainfall grassland that's in reasonable condition, but when we look across it, but if we walk and look into it like the raindrops would, we find that surface is like concrete. So the bulk of that water is non-effective. They've got high rainfall, that's why they're growing quite a bit of vegetation, but most of it is going as floods or is evaporating out of the surface. Now here's another grassland that most people would be thrilled with. We would classify that as probably extremely good, but is it? Looking down into that grassland, what's the soil like between the plants? It's like concrete. Now, that very grassland you've looked at, here are the results. This is flooding in Kruger National Park, coming from those grasslands higher up that look so beautiful, but are in very bad state. So what I'm saying is that's the cancer of desertification, which we don't even recognize in its early stages like that, where it's already leading to terrible flooding. We all know that for centuries we've blamed it on livestock. And I began my life like that, being very antagonistic to livestock as a wildlifer. It was too many cattle, too many sheep, goats, etc. And as I mentioned in the TED talk, everybody knew that, from Nobel laureates to golf caddies. Okay, it was just a given. We knew it. I was trained that belief and so on. Well, what we've found through just mistakes and persevering and keeping going and trying to understand this problem is that we were just as wrong once when we believed the world was flat. And now I want to explain why that is, so that you get the importance of this cow shit. Here's a grassland in the tropics. This is one on the ranch that I live on and have known for many years. And that grass has just come through 4 months of rain. Now, we'll now go into about 8 months of dryness and no rain. So this is a fixed point photo, and you see the change as that grass dries off. Now, over that 8 months of rain, all that material has to cycle. Now, if it doesn't cycle, what's going to happen to it? And the answer is it's going to shift from biological decay to chemical breakdown and physical weathering. All the creativity in the world, all the money in the world, all the labor in the world can't do a damn thing. You can't even go and drink water. Now, if I said to you, go and have a drink of water, how would you do it without using technology? You'd have to go to the nearest river or lake, get your mouth down and drink. We can't even drink a cup of water without technology. Okay, we can't make furniture, we can't do anything until we pick up a tool. We're a tool-using animal. Now, we behave as though we've got thousands of tools. Well, have we? Let's look at the tools we have. We've got the tool of technology to use in management. That began with sticks and stones. Then we chipped the stones, made them sharper. We were able to sharpen the sticks, but we couldn't influence our environment any more than any other tool-using animal. And then somewhere in the last 1,000,000 years, we got a second tool, of fire. Once we got that, we could begin to melt stones and go into the Copper Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. And look at everything in this room today. The clothes you're wearing, everything in this room. There's nothing here that didn't use technology and fire. So for 1,000,000 years, let's say, of human existence, we had two tools, technology and fire. About 10,000 years ago, after domestication of plants and animals, somewhere around there, humans developed the idea of conservation, resting the environment, let it recover. And it probably would have developed with crop farmers, rotating crops perhaps, or with pastoralists moving their animals. But somewhere along the line we got that. Now, you can train in any university, in any profession, anywhere in the world, and unknowingly, those are the tools you'll be trained to use. The only other tool we've really had is small living organisms to make cheese and wine, and now to begin to genetic engineer other species. But these are the ones for influencing our environment at large. Okay? All right, so we've got this grasslands of the world, let's call them, about 2/3 of the world's land. It's seasonal in nature. We've got a dormant period in which we've got to cycle trillions of tons of vegetation. So how are we going to do it as humans? Because if we don't, it oxidizes. And if it oxidizes, it kills itself, and you get desertification occurring. So we've got to stop it shifting to a chemical, physical breakdown and keep it biological. So let's look at resting the land first. Okay, here's a national park in America. That's been totally rested at the time of that picture for 70, 80 years. That's desertifying as badly as anything we're dealing with in Africa. And why? Because we're resting the land. It's completely opposite of our thinking, how it's been. Now, what about research plots? As you know, research plots were put in all of the Western states pretty well. Long ago, when the government was planning to kill thousands of Navajo sheep, but they needed the data to support that policy, so plots were put in all over the place, taking the animals off, and like stopping cutting your lawn, the grass grew. Photographs were taken, documentation was prepared, policy was followed, 250,000 Navajo sheep were shot, and it got worse, not better. Thank goodness they left the plots. So we can go and look at the plots today and find what was green grassland in 61 had become that in 2002. Now, I took these two pictures from the Range Society's position paper on climate change, and the only explanation we have for that as scientists is unknown processes. What unknown processes? You see, it wasn't in our thinking that resting land, conservation, could cause so much damage. Okay, so the tool of rest is the most powerful tool we have to restore biodiversity in tropical forests, permanently humid areas, oceans, lakes. There's no more powerful tool available to humans than conservation. But when we get into these seasonal environments, it becomes increasingly damaging, and particularly if we get into low rainfall as well. All right, so we've still got this problem of oxidation. This picture is taken near my home in New Mexico, because I live between two countries, and this is just dying grassland in a nature preserve right near my home. Okay, so we've still got this oxidation problem to deal with. So what other tools do we have? Let's look at fire. Now you see why we use fire. We've been using fire to deal with this for thousands of years. You can call it prescribed burn, early burn, whatever you like, but it's fire. And sure, that gets rid of it. But having got rid of the top hamper, it lets the green grass flush. But what has it done to atmospheric pollution? What's it done to effectiveness of the rainfall? What's it done to biodiversity? That's an extremely destructive tool. So we've got rest not working, fire not working. We've still got the problem. So what else have we got? We look in our tool bag and we're left with technology. Now, what technology, even imaginable, could ever deal with billions or trillions of tons of vegetation that needs to be cycled every single year? In Israel, they're spending over 10,000 euros per hectare to use technology to channel the water, use nurseries and so on and irrigation to produce the seedlings, and plant trees. No hope at all of doing anything to address desertification. In the Arab Emirates, they've spent over $30 billion, with a B, dollars on 1% of the land, drip irrigation, water, planting trees, and you can see the desert's just moving through it. So people have tried very, very hard, but there's no hope there that I can see. Okay, so here we've got the problem, and we look at our tools. Technology, I hope you'll all accept it, and anybody, just stop me and correct me if I'm wrong, please. I'm just desperately trying to understand this and help you with me to understand it. I think we can forget technology. Fire, we can forget it. It's not going to replace biological decay. Resting land, not going to do it. It leads to shifting to oxidation. Planting trees and grass, we can do it all we like, but it still doesn't deal with the decay process. So there's no hope there. So if we are going to address these boatloads of people drowning in the Mediterranean, 250,000 tons of sand hitting a city in one day like that, we're all in this boat together. What are we going to do? Frankly, we've got to go back to mimicking nature. And that was what I began to see in the 1960s, but didn't know how to take it from there. We need to go back to understanding that these seasonal rainfall environments of the world, the soil, the plants, the animals, all co-developed together, not one before the other. And they all needed each other. And they developed with numbers of herbivores, large grazing animals, that we can't even imagine today. And those herbivores had pack-hunting predators in numbers we can't even imagine today. And those pack-hunting predators altered the behavior of their prey. Their prey, their main defense, was the herd. And the bigger the herd, the safer they were. And that was the first sort of clue I began to pick up early in my life, when I was still dealing with some intact, vast herds of animals in Africa, and still able to see up to 40 lions in a day just walking on foot in prides of 20, 30 or more. Okay, so these ferocious predators that tackled anything, they affected the behavior of those animals, tended to keep them herded, and the herds had to keep moving for no other reason that nothing likes to feed on its own feces. If they're grazing on the ground and they're in herds, they need to keep moving, just to move on to fresh ground. And so what about overgrazing? All my life, we've been told and taught and everything that this is because of too many animals. But that's a belief. That's a belief that we had thousands of years ago. You can go back into ancient texts and see them blaming the nomads for having too many animals. That's not science. That's a belief we carried into science, and it assumed scientific validity because everybody believed it. So if we look at the science, what does the science tell us? We find quite a different story. And the man who made that, for me, the most clear was Voisin, the Frenchman, who was studying pastures in France, and his work is brilliant. That's why my wife and I got his book republished in this country so that all of you can read it. And I had a lovely letter from his wife. I never met him, but we did that so you guys can read his book, because I've never been able to better his work. It is brilliant. Okay, so he gave us the clue that it's a time problem, not a numbers problem. And then, as I realized that, I went back to other researchers, Scott and Titchmarsh in South Africa, West in Rhodesia, and these guys had all established that, but they'd all made the mistake of taking the data and twisting it to fit the belief. Same mistake that I made and mentioned in the TED Talk, where I proved there were too many elephants. We shot 40,000 elephants and it got worse. A big blunder, because I was just a scientist, a human, and I twisted the data to fit the belief of my training. But after that mistake, I began to say, whoops, something's wrong. Need to relook at this. Well, I'm afraid many of us make that mistake because we're human. So it's very clear, and it's been very clear for over 60 years, that overgrazing's got nothing at all to do with animal numbers. So take half, leave half, correct stocking rate. It's not based on science. It's based on beliefs. Okay, so we finally began to put things together and realize, okay, the behavior of the animals, the movement matters, and the timing is what matters, not whether there's 100 or 1,000,000. That's not the issue. The issue is the timing and the behavior. Now, when I said that in the TED talk, that we've only got one option, I got quite a lot of adverse reaction to that, mostly from academics, really taking strong exception to any scientist being stupid enough to use the word only one option. So after that, I put only in bold and capitalized it. We've got to start getting real. Stop playing games. If there's another option, somebody in the world needs to come up with it. Because I've been saying that for over 50 years, while millions of people are dying as we play games. So if anybody can find another option, I'll be the first in the world to say thank you. I don't believe we've got another option than to handle livestock properly. Now, how were we going to do it? So there's the exact same grassland you looked at earlier, and now we're treating the foreground with livestock, mimicking the wildlife of old, and you see the difference. Now, all that material is down on the surface, and now most of the rain is going to soak in, not run off, and it's going to stay in the soil. And that grass is free to flush green. We didn't have to burn and expose the soil. That grass is free to grow now and not get killed by the oxidizing stuff preventing light reaching the growth buds on the ground. And then in the following season, it's looking much healthier. So we've done that and done that over and over and over, and that knowledge is spreading more and more. But that's using the livestock, but we still had to work out how to do it. So we go back to the desertification issue, and first we look at how did people do it in the past. Well, we had extremely knowledgeable pastoralists. Their whole culture is their livestock. None of us will ever know the amount of knowledge or have the knowledge they had. And they had bunched or mob grazed or whatever you like to call it, their animals, their livestock, for thousands of years, but it created the great man-made deserts. So clearly, bunching, mob grazing, moving our livestock isn't enough. We've got 10,000 years of evidence of that. If you're in a more humid environment, you'll get away with it. You won't see the faults. But to get into the drier environments, the faults show up. Then we'd had about 100 years of modern range science. Now, observant ranchers in Africa picked this up very early on, and they said, we acknowledge that our land is deteriorating, but please believe us, the deterioration accelerated with the introduction of fencing and grazing systems. Now, when they were saying that in the 1950s, all right, they were ridiculed because some of them were barely literate, they were just ignorant ranchers, and they were ridiculed. Damn it, they were right. And they couldn't explain why they were right. When we introduced grazing systems, we accelerated the desertification. And you see that all over the United States, Africa, etc. All right, so clearly, grazing systems, rotations, etc., weren't solving the problem. Herding wasn't solving the problem. What was the problem? And I take you back to what we talked about earlier. The problem was complexity. People were getting their animals or their land right, but they were leaving out other parts of it. We hadn't yet realized that land is not manageable. It is so tied to our culture that the culture of the people and the land are indivisible. And that is so tied to the economy, because the only economy that can sustain any nation ultimately comes from green growing plants on regenerating soil. So when you put these three together, it's like me trying to say to you, any one of you, come and manage the hydrogen in this water. I'd appear stupid. In fact, it's equally stupid if I say to you, manage the land. You can't. We've got 10,000 years of showing us we can't manage land. It's our culture, our economy, and our land that has to be seen as one. Okay, so we had to work out how to do that. Now, that's when, and none of this was in a chronological order. It was mistakes, blunders, dead ends, backing off, just working with more and more people around the world, just keeping pursuing what's working, what isn't working, what's working, what isn't working, determined to find something that would work every time. Now, at some point in that, it suddenly dawned on me, oh my goodness, I see what the systemic problem is. And that is that humans are all using a genetically embedded way of managing. And we're unaware of it because it's so simple. And what it is everything we do in management has an objective. Everything we do. You can't take a decision without it having an objective. Whether it's to buy a jacket, come to this meeting, whatever. Educate your kids, whatever. All right, now, then we had these three tools with which to manage our environment. And then how do we make our decisions in management? Don't you all do it the same way? You have an objective, you're going to use some tool, and then how do you make the decision? You make it on past experience, research results, expert advice, cost, cash flow, profitability, peer pressure, expediency, compromise, cultural norms, whatever. And we all do the same, every one of us. And I realized at that point, okay, that's where the problem, part of the problem is, objectives need a context. So what is the context for our actions? And it's always need, desire, profit, or dealing with a problem, noxious plants to get rid of, or there's an endangered species we're trying to save, so we're dealing with that problem. Now, that is too simple a context for the complexity. That's fine if our objective is to build a bridge. We've got a problem, we can't cross the river. We build a bridge. You build the bridge, you cross the river, you can use it for years, there's no great consequence. But when it comes to management, you remember, complexity, you can't take a management decision without it involving social, cultural complexity, environmental complexity, and economic complexity. So the context was too simple. So we had a simple context, and we had a tool missing. So really what I'm talking to you about tonight is a slight modification on the way we've done things. Let's use this framework we've used for 1,000,000 years that we didn't know about, and let's just modify it slightly. By modifying it slightly, what are we going to do? We're going to bring in livestock. Without livestock, we have no hope now. No matter where we live, because we're all in this boat, as I said, together. And about 2/3 of the world's land, roughly, is grasslands, seasonal environment. And we need a realistic context for our actions. And we call it a holistic context, something that pulls together how we want our lives to be tied to our life-supporting environment, giving us a context that we can now take our actions towards and make our actions socially, environmentally, economically sound, short and long term. So it's a crutch to help any one of us do this in our family, in our community, on our farm, government, any level. So once we got that in place, we could begin to make progress. Now, the first part of that was the cost of the grazing, using the livestock. I said we didn't know how to use the livestock. Clearly, rotational and other grazing systems weren't working. People weren't picking that up, and many of you won't in climate as easy as this is, but you get into New Mexico and it's very different, or parts of Africa, and then you pick up the faults in these. So we needed to put it all together, and that's when the word holistic came in, where we pulled together culture, economy, and the animal planning, grazing, and we plan it on a chart. And it really is that simple. I'm not just putting a kid there to be funny. We've trained illiterate people to do it in remarkably short time. I've taken a school leaver in Africa with very little education, really, and in 1.5 hours taught him how to do it. And he's done a beautiful job. It's very, very simple technique, and it's based on 300 years of military experience in planning immediate battlefield conditions. And we just took that 300 years of experience and converted it to our needs for wildlife, crops, etc., in the complexity of our farms and ranches. So we got that piece in place, the first part of it in the 1960s, early 70s, and we were getting still some erratic results until we got the cultural and the economic part into it. And from then, which was about 1984, when we got the concept of the holistic context, we've seen consistent results. Now, we're training a young woman like this who's got very little education. She's using very simple maps, and she's training other people now, and they're improving their lives. These folks have actually got a river beginning to flow again. And in the Horn of Africa, which is so troubled, we've got pastoralists, as you can see, teaching each other, beginning to train, and openly saying this is the only thing that will save their culture. Not just their livestock, their whole culture. All right, so I remind you then that the reason in our Savory Institute is that we're concentrating on the grasslands is because that's really our Achilles heel, because that's such a vast part of the world that we need to focus on that quickly. Now, I'm just going to finish off with climate change. These are the main things that, as far as we know, and I'm just big picture here, these are the main things leading to climate change: carbon dioxide, excess in the air, nitrous oxide, methane, black carbon, that's particulate matter from diesel engines and felt fire, grass fires and so on, water vapor, and there's a lot of debate about that still. Some people believing the increased water vapor is a major contributor, others saying not. And then, of course, desertification. So these are the main things we have to deal with if we're going to survive. Now, I read a report from an Oxford group a short while ago that shocked me. This was a group of brilliant people, got together, mathematicians, philosophers, other scientists, and they looked at the 5 greatest threats to human survival, and one of them was not climate change. And they explained the reason for that. And the reason was that with the coming climate change that we're already beginning to see, that some parts of the planet would still be inhabitable. I don't know how you think about that, but that means billions of people are going to die if we're thinking of some parts of the planet still being inhabitable. Okay, so it's a very serious situation we're facing. Now, when we look at these, where are they coming from? Those are all coming from the fossil fuels, basically, coal, oil, gas. What about the rest of them? Those are all coming from agriculture. So when we look at these sources of these excesses or problems, and we realize that the bottom lot is our Achilles heel. That's where maybe most of it is coming from. All right, so how are we going to deal with that? We've got atmospheric excess of some of these gases, particulate matter, and we've got the desertification problem. So how are we going to deal with an excess? Just let's use our common sense. We've got to take that excess and do something with it. We've got to put it somewhere. If we put it in the oceans, where a lot of it will go, they're already acidifying, already killing is killing coral reefs and things like that. Now, a lot of it is going to go there, whatever we do. So we're going to have increasing problems there. If we try to put it into trees and grass, grow more trees, grow more grass, they're really part of the ambient cycle. So it's going to come back at us. They're part of the normal cycle. It's not going to stay in a tree or grass for centuries. So we've got to put it somewhere, and it leaves us with only one logical place, the soil. And the great grain-growing areas of the world aren't former forests, they're former grasslands, because they had such deep soils full of carbon. Okay, so logically, we're going to have to concentrate on the soils to store it. Now, how are we going to stop adding? We've got an excess up there. How are we going to stop adding if we use our genetically embedded way of managing? We've got 3 tools. How can we stop adding? We can stop adding the ones from fossil fuels by just finding benign sources of energy that can stop adding what's coming from fossil fuels. What about the rest? Can we stop adding using technology, fire, and rest? And the answer is no. They're all going to keep adding. So we've got a problem there. Where are we going to remove and store if we use technology, fire, and rest and make our management decisions as we do today? We can't remove and store any of those that I've ringed there, particularly the ones coming from fossil fuels and the same gases coming from the land. If we do it with technology, it's going to be like playing Russian roulette with all 6 chambers loaded. We have never yet, as far as I'm aware of, solved a major natural problem with technology, a problem of nature, without a backlash on us. So that's highly dangerous, and these two would continue. So if we continue with our genetically embedded way, we're deeply in trouble. Now, let's look at adding livestock to our toolbox. Now, what can we stop adding? All of those that I've ticked. We can begin reversing desertification, getting that if the excess water vapor in the atmosphere is a problem, it can only be coming from the soils and the aquifers that we're pumping out and from the ice that's melting. Because the soil and the ice was the greatest storage place of fresh water. Now, we can begin to get that back if that is part of the problem. So what else can we do? We can still use technology and begin to address the stuff that's coming from fossil fuels. So we could, as long as we add livestock to our toolbox, begin to address adding, not adding to all of them. What about removing and storing? If we add livestock to our toolbox, we can begin to remove the cause of desertification. We can begin to store or bring all of these down. If we operate as we're doing at the moment, rejecting livestock, we've got almost no hope. If we add livestock to our toolbox, we've now got a possibility all the way through. So now do you see why I said to you, this represents your future? What that represents, restoring biological decay, etc. We have no option but to add livestock properly managed. Now, we won't all manage them properly. We can do it with Voisin's rational grazing. People can follow his stuff, go back to the original work. In more humid climates, it's brilliant stuff. Or if you're in the more complex climates, you can do what some of you guys are doing. You're all improving with it, and you can go further and further as you learn more about making decisions holistically better and better. And none of us are perfect at it. I'm living on a ranch where we're doing it all the time, and when people come, we show them everything, warts and all, the mistakes we're making. We all keep making mistakes, but damn it, it's getting better and better and better as we get smarter at it, and we can all begin to do that. All right, so in conclusion, I said at the beginning I would explain how simple it is. Nothing I've said to you tonight is complicated. Many people coming through it say it's just simple common sense. I was stranded in Mexico City once and got talking to a Brazilian engineer at a crowded airport. It was the only seat I could find. And we talked about what he was doing, because my father had been a civil engineer, and I was very interested in what he was doing building the new capital city. And we talked about it at some length, and then he asked me what I was doing, and I always dread that question. Well, I don't know how to answer it, and so I tried to explain to him that I was actually an independent scientist just trying to work on the biggest problem facing mankind, the failure of civilizations and the threat we were facing. And so he looked at me and said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Well," I said, "actually, we've got some breakthroughs and we're making some progress, and I'm excited." And he absolutely floored me. He said, "It must be very simple." And I said, "Why'd you say that?" And he said, "Whenever there's been what seems an insurmountable problem, when we find a solution, it's always very simple." And I think everything I've said to you tonight is very simple. So just to recap it, we're all using a genetic deeply embedded way of making our management decisions. That's where we're running into trouble, and there are two flaws in it. The objectives we had lacked a context. That's why we keep getting unexpected results and not doing too well, and there was a tool missing. Without livestock, we couldn't address the problem over most of the world. Now, how are we going to do something about that? We cannot wait for leadership from politicians or institutions because they cannot adopt new scientific insights ahead of public opinion, which is what leadership involves. All right, so where are we going to get leadership from? And the answer is from you. Ordinary people, like you and I in this room. Whether we're in our institutions, universities, whatever, we're also citizens. We're also individual family people are just going to have to start taking the lead and shifting public opinion to accepting livestock, shifting to where policies can change, etc. So how are we going to do that? We've tried many things, thought about it a great deal, and the strategy we've come up with is to focus on the grasslands first, because that's our easiest and highest return in dealing with the whole problem of desertification, climate change, and to facilitate change in our institutions through forming a network of hubs around the world. A hub being a place or a group of people that get together, locally led, locally managed, entrepreneurial, come up with a good plan of how they're going to operate some land base, and then they deal with us. And Trey Cates is here with me, and he can talk to any of you about this in much better detail than I can. But we're trying to get these hubs formed where just we can, as humans, begin to collaborate, work together, whatever our positions, pastoralists, farmers, ranchers, academics, researchers, whatever, and begin managing holistically, spreading the knowledge and spreading it within our region, our area, in our own language, training in our own culture and everything, and then connecting these hubs around the world through a sophisticated internet platform, through easily obtainable learning, training materials, etc., and developing that network of hubs around the world, which we are engaged in. And we had a conference about a month ago in London, our second conference of these hubs, and we had people from 25 countries there, and it's really exciting. And I had a short while before that been in the first Nordic hub in Sweden, and while I was there, they were communicating with the guys they'd met from Patagonia at the previous year's conference and communicating directly, transferring knowledge directly. So we are trying to develop this hub network around the world as rapidly as we can, but going at a controlled pace, and it's beginning to work. There are 4 hubs in Mexico already. They're already beginning to influence government policy. There are a number of hubs in this country. I'll be going after this to Turkey, where they've developed a hub already. So we're developing this network of hubs around the world, where if you can just picture it, the name of the game is collaboration. We're going to have to teamwork, collaborate, and deal with this as just ordinary people, and do it in this way, we believe. And one of my hopes, and an idea that's come to me lately, and I'll finish on this, is I'm hoping that because this is a city problem, and all the power has gone to the cities, economic power, voting power, everything, that's where the policies are following, that's where our universities are, our training, educational institutes, and everything. So as we develop these hubs, I'm beginning to picture the idea of cities adopting a hub near them so that we get this knowledge into the city populations as much as we can. There's nothing to stop a university adopting a hub and working close with it. So I hope we can see more of that in the future. Just all of us beginning to collaborate, work together. I believe we've got a hope when we can begin to manage holistically and develop policies holistically. I believe then we've got a fighting chance in the future. Without that, I think it's going to be a grim future. Thank you.